Hey everyone, tonight we'll drift back into a very peculiar kind of history, not the kind with grand battles, heroic conquests, or miraculous inventions. No, tonight's history is far quieter, almost horizontal in its energy. Tonight, we talk about the kind of history that occurs in bedrooms, on soft chairs, and sometimes in the very slow tick of clocks. Yes, that kind of history where failure is practically a royal family tradition, but also where the lessons about time, patience, and diligence are oddly profound. So, let me tell you a story. A story about a boy named Aryan, or Jake, or maybe something in tween names don't matter in the grand tapestry of laziness. What matters is the habit, that insidious, creeping tendency to say, "I'll do it later," until later never arrives. Aryan lived in a small village that could barely be found on a map. Not that it mattered much. He wouldn't have moved anyway. He lived with his parents, a little brother who was marginally more active than a sleeping snail, and his grandfather, a man who was so wise he made old philosophers look like teenagers with Wi-Fi. People came from neighboring villages just to ask the grandfather for advice. Of course, he was wise, because apparently one generation of wisdom wasn't tea enough to cure the lazy boy who shared his living space. Now, Aryan had a problem. A really large, almost comically tragic problem. He was extremely lazy. Not in the charming, I like to relax sometimes way. No, this was a full-time, career-grade laziness. If Aryan had a task to do today, he would undoubtedly decide tomorrow would be better. And then tomorrow, he would delay again, usually until the task grew legs and walked itself out of existence. If his chores piled up, he piled excuses. If homework needed finishing, it waited for inspiration, which, naturally, never showed up. His parents tried everything: persuasion, gentle reasoning, the occasional sigh loud enough to be heard in neighboring countries, and finally, scolding, which is basically persuasive yelling. All futile, his little brother moved past him in skill, knowledge, and occasionally height, because while Aryan perfected procrastination, his brother perfected everything else. One day, in a rare move of desperation, his father decided to involve the grandfather whose calm and measured thinking could turn even a toddler's tantrum into a philosophical debate. Pondered this particular dilemma for longer than one might think necessary, and then, as if struck by a rare bolt of creative genius, he devised a plan. He called Aryan over and handed him a small black stone. Not just any stone. Mind you, this one was special, according to the grandfather. Rubbing this stone against iron would transform iron into gold, or so he said. He could have said it turned pencils into spaghetti, for all Aryan cared. The boy's mind was tuned to fantasy by that point. "You may keep it until tomorrow evening," the grandfather said, voice calm and deliberate. "After that, it returns to me. Use it wisely." Aryan's eyes sparkled, which is appropriate because when a lazy mind is suddenly faced with instant wealth, one imagines the sparkle as something akin to fireflies trapped in a jar. He imagined the gold he would make, the riches, the fame, the admiration, though one suspects he mostly imagined pillows stuffed with gold and a lifetime of naps. Of course, being Aryan, he thought, tomorrow is plenty of time. Evening arrived, and he ate dinner. Then he went to bed. Why? Well, why not? After all, the magic stone could wait until morning, couldn't it? Morning came. Sunlight peeked over the horizon. Birds chirped, and Aryan, decided to have breakfast first, then perhaps a brief nap, a small warm-up before the great gold-making endeavor. Because, apparently, one must prepare for greatness with ritualistic lounging. By the time he opened the door to go to the market, hoping to procure scrap iron, the sun was setting. And, naturally, the grandfather was already there, stone in hand, shaking his head with the subtle dignity of someone who had been through this many times. "You've had all the time you needed," said the grandfather. "Your opportunity is gone." Aryan begged, pleaded, offered promises of future productivity. The grandfather, unwavering, reminded him gently yet firmly that laziness doesn't deserve extra chances. "You had 24 hours, he said. "You could have achieved something, but instead, you did nothing." Aryan's tears were unmatched in their intensity, mostly because he had finally understood the abstract concept of lost opportunity in a very concrete, golden way. But the lesson was received at last. And thus, our story, though brief and lacking in sweeping battles or celestial visions, teaches something timeless. Time is precious, and procrastination is the thief of opportunity. Now, let's drift a little further into the quiet lessons of history, shall we? Aryan, in his own humble way, embodies what many of history's greatest procrastinators have done: delay, fail, and eventually recognize that inaction has consequences. And in the grand tapestry of life, that is, ironically, one of the clearest motivators. Consider, for instance, a man named Charles, not particularly Charles V, but certainly a Charles who inherited more responsibilities than he could juggle. He was called the Great, which is optimistic, considering his empire often collapsed faster than his liver could recover from the endless feasts he hosted. Yet, within his failures lies a lesson. Even the mightiest can falter when preparation meets delay. And sometimes, failing spectacularly is the first step toward understanding what must truly be done. Similarly, Aryan's story, though quaint, whispers the same truth. The small, habitual delays, those "I'll do it tomorrow" moments compound into monumental regret. And yet, if noticed in time, they offer a window for reflection. The gold he could have made, the tasks he could have completed, the progress he could have achieved, all are reminders that time rewards action, not intention. We'll pause here for a moment and reflect on the sheer monotony of missed opportunities, because, in their quiet, unremarkable way, they are perfect teachers, just as history itself drifts slowly toward those who observe carefully. Aryan's failure is a gentle nudge toward diligence. Now, let's drift over to another small, unassuming disaster, other figure, slightly older, slightly wiser, who somehow teaches us about persistence, about using the hours given to us without squandering them on trivialities. But that, my friends, will come in the next part. For now, let's let Aryan's story linger softly in the back of our minds, like a reminder that tomorrow is rarely as promising as it seems, and that even small moments of inaction have a way of snowballing into monumental consequences. Now, let's settle back into our quiet drift through history, where the clocks tick slowly and the lessons creep in almost unnoticed. Aryan, our small village boy, has already demonstrated what happens when time is wasted. Opportunities vanish, gold remains unmade, and lessons arrive in the form of gentle regret. But as it turns out, Aryan is far from alone in the grand annals of laziness and delay. Consider, if you will, Emperor Nero. Of course, he's famous for fiddling while Rome burned, though, funnily enough, fiddles hadn't been invented yet. But Nero's story is a classic study in procrastination with disastrous consequences. Nero inherited immense responsibility, more than any young man could reasonably manage, and he frequently opted for pleasure over preparation. Banquets, performances, elaborate architectural fantasies, he had them all. The empire, meanwhile, slowly slipped from under his feet. And yet, there's a motivational angle hidden in this historical monotony. Nero's failures remind us that even the most privileged, the most gifted, can falter when they don't act with foresight. He had the tools, the influence, the resources, but delayed decisions, misplaced priorities, and avoidance led to collapse. It's almost as if history itself is whispering, "Act now. Do what is necessary, even if it's boring, even if it's difficult. Your tomorrow may not exist. Now, let's float over to a quieter, less dramatic figure, Thomas Edison, though perhaps more energetic than our sleepy tone allows. Edison, by contrast, shows that persistence, diligent, steady effort truly pays. His laboratory was a mess, yes, and he failed repeatedly, hundreds of times. One could almost imagine him lying on a workbench, thinking, "I'll invent the light bulb tomorrow." But he didn't. Every failure, each sparkless filament, each experiment gone awry, became a lesson. He recorded it, analyzed it, and adjusted. And after thousands of attempts, he succeeded. Here's the connection. Aryan, if only he had acted when he had the stone, would have experienced his own light bulb moment. The magic wasn't the stone, it was the action. Edison teaches us, in soft, almost boring monotone, that success is a slow accumulation of small efforts. Lazy days, wasted opportunities, they create nothing but consistent work, however repetitive or dull, gradually builds into achievement. And achievement, of course, is vastly preferable to staring at a black stone, wondering what could have been. Let's drift further, perhaps across oceans and centuries, to the sleepy, late-night failures of explorers. Ferdinand Magellan, for instance, attempted to circumnavigate the globe. He faced storms, mutinies, and a crew that probably spent half their time complaining rather than rowing. And yet, the lesson is not in the drama of near-death experiences or seasickness. It's in the persistence, the slow, unglamorous endurance. Each day at sea, each adjustment to course, each rationed meal was a micro-step toward eventual accomplishment. Had he been lazy, had he postponed decisions, his expedition would have ended even more ignominiously than it did. And so we see that Aryan's tiny village, his small black stone, his wasted 24 hours, are a microcosm of something much larger. History is full of people who had resources, opportunities, and talent, but some failed spectacularly through delay or inaction, while others achieved by taking the mundane, repetitive, necessary steps that no one notices in the moment. Now, let's glance at a slightly different example, the field of art. Vincent van Gogh, the sleepy genius, spent long stretches doing what appeared to be nothing. He wandered, he painted obsessively, sometimes over and over the same scenes. But critics of the time mocked him, calling him unproductive, or worse. And yet, his persistence in seemingly trivial repetition eventually produced masterpieces that changed the art world forever. His failures, his struggles, his lazy wandering through the countryside, they all contributed to a larger lesson. Patience and steady practice matter. Motivation alone isn't enough. Action is. Returning to Aryan for a moment, imagine if he had acted even a fraction of what Edison, Magellan, or Van Gogh did. A few hours of effort, a few decisions made promptly, could have transformed the stone into a fortune, as promised. In the real world, of course, there are no magic stones, but the principle remains. Consistent, timely action converts possibility into reality. And speaking of reality, we drift now to the quieter, less celebrated failures, the bureaucrats, the scholars, the men and women whose mistakes were never recorded in textbooks because they were too sleepy, too careful, or too cautious. Their lesson is equally profound. Delaying decisions, avoiding small tasks, or simply waiting for inspiration that never comes produces nothing. Time, unlike them, does not nap. Every hour wasted is a page in life's ledger marked unredeemed. Consider another subtle historical irony. Benjamin Franklin, one of the great polymaths, often wrote about the value of time in letters, essays, and personal reflection. Franklin rose above temptation, laziness, and distraction, meticulously tracking hours, assigning tasks, and methodically accomplishing goals. His life slightly less dramatic than an empire's collapse, but equally instructive, demonstrates that careful, disciplined use of time is a foundation for enduring success. If Aryan had kept even a Franklin-style schedule, that black stone would have been transformed before lunch, rather than gathering dust on his bedside table. So here we drift to the soft moral of this historical meditation. The lazy boy's failure is not unique, and yet it is entirely preventable. Across history, from emperors to inventors to artists, one sees a pattern. Delay is seductive, but ultimately destructive. Action, however small, however repetitive, builds quietly into success. Opportunity, once gone, rarely returns. And as our eyelids grow heavy with these tales of delay, folly, and eventual insight, we see that Aryan's story, the 24 wasted hours, the lost gold, is not merely a bedtime fable. It is a metaphor for every quiet, procrastinated hour in our lives. Because in the soft, slow ticking of the clock, history whispers its drowsy reminder: do what can be done today. Tomorrow is often already too late. Now, let us float gently toward another case, slightly larger, slightly more dramatic, but just as instructive. In the next part, we will meet another figure, equally flawed, whose failures and slow, sleepy missteps accidentally teach us about perseverance. For now, let Aryan's regret linger softly in the background, like a gentle, drowsy tide, reminding us that time is precious and laziness is costly. Welcome back, fellow time travelers of the softly ticking hours. If you've been following Aryan's tale, you already know that laziness has consequences. The boy missed his chance with the magic stone, learned the quiet power of regret, and now hopefully understands that action matters more than idle dreams. But of course, humans are rarely alone in their folly. Across history, the royal class, those crowned with privilege and authority, also offers a treasure trove of sleepy lessons. Let us drift gently to the court of Charles VIII of France. Now, Charles VIII had ambitions, which is a generous word. He wanted to conquer Italy, because apparently one country wasn't enough to tire out a lifetime of indulgence. But he did so with the precision of someone who had just woken from a 3-hour nap and didn't quite remember what day it was. His army, noble in appearance but slightly confused in execution, marched and stumbled. Castles fell, alliances wavered, and somewhere along the way, Charles forgot to check the logistics provisions. Supplies, maps, small details that tend to matter when trying to take over a foreign peninsula. And yet, in his sluggish and disorganized campaign, there is a lesson that whispers softly in our ears. Even grand ambitions must be paired with steady effort, attention, and timing. Delay in planning or preparation, even among kings, leads to avoidable failure. In Aryan's case, the stone waited for him, gold unmade. In Charles's case, the Italian campaign waited for him, victories unclaimed. The principle is the same. Time rewards action and preparation, even or perhaps especially among the privileged. Now, let us drift sideways to another monarch, Elizabeth I of England, who, though widely celebrated, had her own series of sleepy near misses early in her reign. She faced threats from every side: Spain, France, internal rebellions, and the occasional overzealous advisor. She made mistakes, deferred decisions, and sometimes let a crisis simmer longer than was advisable. But unlike Aryan, Elizabeth eventually learned a subtle lesson that history books rarely emphasize: deliberation, when paired with eventual decisive action, transforms potential failure into strategic success. Here's the motivational nugget hidden in these slow-moving court dramas. Mistakes, delays, even laziness, whether in the form of indecision or idle waiting, can be converted into growth if acknowledged and corrected. Aryan had his wake-up call when the grandfather returned with the stone. Elizabeth's wake-up call came in the form of spies, rebellions, and a Spanish armada. Both examples, separated by centuries and circumstance, demonstrate that time waits for no one, but reflection plus action can still yield progress. Let us drift further to another royal figure who embodies the sleepy charm of historical failure: Louis XVI of France. He, of course, is famous for being spectacularly slow in adapting to the changing political climate of his time. He hesitated when action was required, pondered excessively when decisions were urgent, and consistently underestimated the consequences of delay. While Aryan delayed gold-making by a few hours, Louis delayed reforms by years. The result, unsurprisingly, was disaster. Yet there's an odd kind of motivational beauty here. History often teaches through contrast. By observing others' mistakes, we are given a roadmap of what not to do on, an implicit guide for what to do. Now, I know what you're thinking. Royal disasters, lazy boys, slow decision-making. How does any of this help me at all? Well, dear listener, the calm whisper of history has an answer. Every missed opportunity, every lazy day, every postponed task is a small lesson. Aryan's lost stone, Charles's failed campaign, Louis's ignored reforms, they all converge into one soft, monotone truth. Action, however modest, matters. Delay is a thief of potential, and reflection without follow-through is just dreaming. Speaking of dreaming, let's glide toward another sleepy figure, one who proves that persistence, even in the face of repeated failure, can be transformative. Abraham Lincoln. Before he became president, Lincoln lost multiple elections, faced business failures, and suffered personal tragedies that would have convinced a lesser person to nap indefinitely and never run for office again. And yet, he persisted, slowly, steadily, with minor setbacks along the way. He learned, adapted, and eventually led a nation through one of its most tumultuous periods. The lesson drifts softly into our story. Even small, deliberate efforts made day after day build the foundation for monumental change. Aryan's one day wasted was a minor setback, but in life, habits compound. One wasted day can become several. One ignored opportunity can become a pattern. Let's take a soft moment to reflect. The lazy boy in the village, the kings and queens who stumbled, the inventors and leaders who failed repeatedly, they all illustrate a sleepy, patient form of motivation. It's not about adrenaline or dramatic heroics. It's about noticing the quiet accumulation of time, about valuing each hour, and about converting small, seemingly mundane actions into long-term progress. As we drift along, it's easy to see that Aryan's story mirrors these larger historical arcs. The stone was his opportunity. The day was his empire. His failure to act is trivial compared to the failures of kings, generals, and presidents, but the principle is identical. Delay, hesitation, and laziness compound into regret. Action, persistence, and even modest effort compound into achievement. The difference between a lazy boy and a great historical figure is not always talent, wealth, or intelligence. Sits the consistent use of time. And so, as our eyelids grow heavier and the soft ticking of time becomes almost audible, let us meditate gently on these sleepy lessons. Opportunities, like the black stone, are transient. Laziness, like unmade gold or failed campaigns, leads to quiet regret. Persistence, repetition, and timely action, no matter how slow, accumulate into meaningful success. In the next part, we will continue our slow drift through history, exploring even more figures who, through failure and delay, left behind soft, instructive whispers about the value of using time wisely. For now, Aryan's story floats gently in the background, a reminder that even a single day can teach a lifetime lesson. Welcome back, fellow travelers of time's quiet river. If you've been following Aryan's story, you know the tale of a boy, a black stone, and 24 hours wasted. You've met emperors, kings, and queens who failed spectacularly, often because they hesitated, procrastinated, or simply ignored the clock. And now, let's drift over to another part of history, one that is quieter, less dramatic, but equally instructive. Inventors, artists, and those who remind us that patience, persistence, and attention to time can shape a legacy. Consider Thomas Edison again, though we touched on him briefly before. Edison failed repeatedly, sometimes hundreds of times, in a single experiment. One could imagine him in a dimly lit lab, filament in hand, muttering softly to himself, "Maybe tomorrow it will work." Yet, he did not rely on tomorrow. He acted, he adjusted, and he repeated. Each failed attempt was a tiny investment in knowledge, and eventually, after countless hours, he created the light bulb. Light, illuminating, warm-born from persistence. Aryan, had he spent his hours wisely, could have learned the same lesson. Opportunity rewards action, not intention. Now, let's drift to the realm of art. Vincent van Gogh, a man often described as eccentric, lonely, and, frankly, quite lazy in social interactions, spent entire days painting and observing the world. He failed to sell most of his works during his lifetime. Critics mocked him, friends doubted him, and yet he persisted quietly, meticulously, slowly. Today, his paintings fetch unimaginable sums, not because he was brilliant alone, but because he dedicated hours, days, and years to consistent practice. Here is the gentle, motivational whisper. The small, repetitive actions of today accumulate into the extraordinary of tomorrow. Aryan's wasted day contrasts sharply against Van Gogh's quiet diligence. Let's glide further into history to Nikola Tesla. Tesla, the man who invented alternating current, wireless communication concepts, and countless other wonders, often worked alone for hours on end. He had financial setbacks, rivalries, and countless days when nothing seemed to progress. Yet he continued. Every hour spent designing, calculating, and dreaming, every failure included, moved him one step closer to innovation. Even in failure, there is a lesson. Time used with focus, even quietly, compounds into creation. Aryan's laziness reminds us of the alternative. Opportunity wasted is potential forever lost. Now, allow yourself to drift slowly toward another corner of history, that of writers and philosophers. Take someone like Marcel Proust, who spent years writing, revising, and rethinking sentences. His contemporaries could not understand why he worked so slowly, why progress seemed glacial. Yet his persistence produced In Search of Lost Time, a literary monument to observation, patience, and careful attention. Here again, the motivational thread is subtle but clear, deliberate, consistent effort, and in small doses yields extraordinary results. Aryan, in contrast, had one day and wasted it entirely. Let us pause and reflect. Aryan's black stone is a metaphor. Every day we receive our own stones, opportunities, tasks, projects, decisions. Some are fleeting, some return occasionally, but all are limited. Time spent idly is potential lost, a quiet theft from future possibilities. And history, in its endless procession of lazy nobles, persistent inventors, and meticulous artists, repeatedly confirms this. Use your time wisely, and the ordinary can become remarkable. Now, let's drift gently toward the world of exploration, another domain where the consequences of delay are quietly dramatic. Take Captain James Cook. Cook faced storms, scurvy, and endless bureaucratic delays. Yet he planned, prepared, and acted steadily. Each slow step mapping coastlines, noting currents, recording flora and fauna accumulated into discoveries that changed the world. He did not rely on inspiration alone. He relied on steady, persistent action, much like the small, focused steps Aryan could have taken to turn his black stone into gold. And then there's the subtle contrast provided by procrastinators in exploration. Countless unnamed sailors, thinkers, and travelers of history delayed decisions, ignored maps, and hesitated when action was required. Some failed quietly, never making it into the history books. Their lesson, gently spoken, is just as important. Inaction has consequences, whether dramatic or unseen. Aryan's 24 wasted hours mirror these tiny historical tragedies, small yet potent in their implications. Now, let us drift toward one final comparison before we begin to settle this evening's lesson. Consider Marie Curie, working alone, carefully, methodically, handling dangerous substances, failing repeatedly, and often nearly giving up. She persisted. Step by step, hour by hour, experiment by experiment, she discovered polonium and radium. Her diligence and her meticulous use of time-transformed science forever. She reminds us, softly but insistently, that discipline and steady effort, no matter how unglamorous, create lasting impact. Aryan, by contrast, ignored the simple, available task before him. The stone could have yielded gold, but he delayed. History whispers softly through Edison, Van Gogh, Tesla, Cook, and Curie. The hours you spend matter. Wasted time is invisible, yet real, quiet, yet costly. Action, consistency, and patience are the true alchemy of life. So, as we settle into the last drowsy stretch of tonight's historical journey, remember this gentle truth. History is full of lazy boys and girls, of delayed decisions and wasted hours. And yet, it is also full of those who understood the quiet power of time. They acted, they persisted, and they slowly turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. Aryan's one lost day is trivial, but it illustrates the principle perfectly. Seize the moment, or watch it slip away forever. And with that, we drift quietly into the final part, where we will bring all these sleepy lessons together, weaving Aryan's tale, historical failures, and the gentle power of persistence into a final meditation on using time wisely. For now, let the images of lazy boys, faltering kings, and tireless inventors float softly in your mind, like clouds moving across the slow, endless sky of history. Welcome back to the final part of tonight's slow drift through history, laziness, and the subtle power of persistence. If you followed Aryan's tale, you already know: a boy, a black stone, and 24 hours wasted. You've seen kings falter, inventors persevere, and artists dedicate years to their craft. And now, let us gently weave it all together into a final meditation on time, action, and the quiet rewards of diligence. Aryan, our small village boy, stands as a microcosm of human experience. One day, one chance, one opportunity, and it was wasted. Yet, unlike the historical figures who sometimes failed spectacularly, Aryan's story is intentionally simple. Its lesson is obvious, almost painfully so. Time waits for no one. The stone, a symbol of opportunity, could have produced immense wealth, but only if he acted. Now, let's drift across centuries once more. Consider the repeated patterns we've observed. Charles VIII, delayed campaigns and sloppy planning cost him victories. Louis XVI, hesitation and indecision contributed to personal and national collapse. Edison, Van Gogh, Tesla, Curie, and Cook all demonstrated the quiet, slow accumulation of effort over time. Each failure, each tedious hour, was an investment that eventually produced something extraordinary. The contrast is almost drowsily poetic. Some squander their time, while others, seemingly insignificant hours at a time, shape history. It's not a dramatic revelation. It's a gentle truth that seeps in, almost unnoticed, much like the passing of days themselves. Aryan's 24 wasted hours, if multiplied over a lifetime, could have defined his destiny. But there is a hopeful angle here, soft and quiet. It is never too late to start. He may have lost one day, but every subsequent day is a new opportunity. History is full of late bloomers, of people who, after decades of apparent inactivity or failure, finally acted and changed their world. For instance, take Colonel Sanders, who started KFC in his 60s after numerous failed businesses, or Grandma Moses, who began painting in her 70s. Their lessons drift softly into our narrative. Age, prior failures, or past laziness do not preclude achievement. What matters is the decision to act, now, today, without procrastination. Aryan, like all of us, has countless stones in his life moments where he could act, where he could invest his energy. Some are large, some small, but all are opportunities to transform effort into meaningful outcome. Let us float back to Aryan. Imagine him reflecting quietly, stone long gone, mind gradually awake. Perhaps he realizes that gold isn't always literal. Sometimes the gold is habit, discipline, and timely action. That is the treasure he can begin to accumulate starting now. One small decision, one small effort, repeated, is enough to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. History, in its soft monotone, reinforces this lesson repeatedly. Kings and emperors, inventors and artists, explorers and writers offer examples of failure transformed into insight. The lazy boy is not condemned forever. He is reminded, gently but firmly, that time is valuable, that action matters, and that delayed effort can always be replaced by deliberate engagement. Let us drift toward the final whisper of motivation. Life, like history, is composed of quiet, incremental moments. The ticking clock in the background is relentless, but not cruel. It does not shout, it does not demand. It merely moves forward and invites us to move with it. Aryan's regret, the royal disasters, the tireless inventors all, are echoes of this subtle principle. Action now compounds into achievement later. Delay, however soft or sleepy, compounds into regret. So, dear listener, as we settle into the final hours of this bedtime journey through failure, perseverance, and quiet triumph, consider this your gentle call to action. Take the small steps today that you have been postponing. Use your hours deliberately, even if slowly, even if imperfectly. Remember that consistency, patience, and attention to time are the truest form of magic, far more powerful than any stone, crown, or accolade. Aryan's story, simple as it is, floats alongside the grand sweep of history. One boy, one wasted day, one stone lost yet. The lesson resonates universally. History whispers, softly and persistently, do not waste your hours. They are the building blocks of every future achievement. And with that, we drift gently to the close of tonight's journey. If Aryan could learn from his one lost day, and if kings, inventors, and artists could turn repeated failures into legacy, then you, yes, you, softly listening, can begin today, quietly, steadily, and meaningfully. Sleep well, dear listener, knowing that each hour, when used with intention, is a small miracle. And remember Aryan, the lazy boy, whose story reminds us all that time is both a gentle teacher and a relentless guide.